Let's go.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Zephyr's Adjusted for Risk podcast from the shores of Lake Tahoe. I am Ryan Nauman, the market strategist here at Zephyr. It's no secret that people are living longer than ever, and that can present a challenge for financial advisors. My next guest is an industry expert who can help us understand the impact of increased longevity and share some really interesting and additional thoughts on the subject that might be overlooked by some. But first, today's episode is sponsored by the award-winning Zephyr, which helps investment professionals make more informed investment decisions on behalf of their clients. All right, enough from me. Let's go ahead and get started and move on to the star of the show. I am honored and welcome to introduce Sal Capizzi. Sal is the Executive Vice President at Dunham Associates Investment Counsel. Sal, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's an honor to have you on. I'm really excited about this conversation. You were on about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago.
Was a while. Yep.
I'm glad I did not scare you away after that first time. So thank you.
Yeah, actually, we had a very lively and wonderful conversation.
Yes, it was fantastic. And no doubt we're going to have another one here today. Can you just tell us a little bit more about yourself and Dunham and Associates?
Well, so Dunham and Associates and our affiliate Dunham Trust Company, we were established back in 1985. So we are 40 years old. The trust company is 26 years old. And what we do is we take a look at various aspects of a person's life. So whether they're just starting out, whether it's the matriarch and patriarch who now are setting stuff up for the kids, right? We take a look at developing what we hope would be the best situation for them based on what they want to do. And that's where all of this starts to originate, because as you start looking at all of these these trusts that we work on, cases we work on, retirees, you start seeing a pattern develop that has to be brought into the planning. And quite simply, Ryan, that is that people are living longer, whether it's the beneficiary of a trust or retiree.
I'm glad you brought that up. And you're talking about the stage of the investor or clients. And that's what we're going to talk about today, is focus on the retirement. It's very timely because there's 70 million some baby boomers that are either in retirement or going to be retired. So it's a very timely conversation, one that's very important. And as we know, retirement, people are living longer than ever. So that means they're going to be in their retirement stage longer. And when I started Sal some 20 years ago, retirement planning's really evolved. Back then, we had a lot of pension plans. Pension plans were available. It's evolved now. There's not very many pensions available for investors, and other things have changed. What do you believe has been the biggest change for you?
Well, clearly, when you take a look at pension plans, right, the ability for corporations to take the investment risk offloaded onto their employees is a major shift in terms of how retirement is going to look like. And that's where the planning that your audience, your financial advisors that are listening, that's where it becomes so critical, because before, where you had a defined benefit program, you knew exactly what you were receiving for your entire retirement. Now it's all dependent upon what the amount of assets are that you accumulated during your working life, and then what those are generating. Right. But again, in terms of the things that have changed also, it's just life expectancy. Right. It's just Ryan, so sometimes they kid me in terms of my age, right? And when they say, they say, Sal is so old that when he was young, the Dead Sea Scrolls were only sick. Right? So I have seen a number of things. So what longevity brings along with it is experience, Ryan, when I started in the business, do you know how we did retirement planning? It was age based.
Yeah.
What that means, because for those of you that are, are using e-money and other more sophisticated tools, this is the way we were trained. They said, take a look at your client, take a look at their age. If let's say they're 20 years old, that means 80% of their portfolio should be in equities, 20% should be in bonds. 30 years old, then it's a 70-30.
Yeah.
By the time they reach age 65, then their split should be 35% in equities, 65% in bonds, and you just keep moving the bonds up further.
Yeah.
Now, was that because we were all lazy? Was that because we weren't sophisticated? No, it's because if I had a client back in the 80s that was now that was 65 years old, the expectation was that that client would pass away somewhere between their mid 70s or maybe early 80s. Meant to us is there was one thing we were worried about, Ryan. The one thing we were worried about was sequence risk. We didn't want the equities to decimate the planning we had done for their retirement because we knew that really we were looking from that point, maybe 10 to 15 years, maybe 20 years in retirement. That's all we were worried about, keeping the portfolio safe for them through retirement. It's different now, isn't it, Ryan?
I remember those days. And then
No, you don't. No, you're not as old
well,
as I
I
am.
do. I am. Date funds. Remember, target date funds
Yes.
were very popular where you just, as you get older, you change into based on how old you were, that series of target date funds, right? It was easy. Maybe too easy and simple.
But the complexity now is that if we are living longer, does the way do those target date funds, does that type of planning, having more equities when you enter into retirement, is that still valid? Fidelity had a great sign way back during the Great Dig, right? It was this big billboard, and what it basically said was the first person to live to be 150 years old is alive today, right?
Yeah.
And then you have to stop for a second to think about it, right? And it's like, yeah, that's right. Like so they're alive today, right? So what does that mean, right? It
Yeah.
means that if we are living longer, if we assume 2% inflation, let's assume we hit the Fed's target rate. It's one thing to have 2% inflation when I'm expected to live 10 to 15 years in retirement. It's a completely different situation if I'm expected to live 40 or 50 years in retirement. What do I mean by that? If I'm at age 65, 40 years from there is what, 105 years old? Or, 10 more years on top of that, 50 years is 115, right? Is it conceivable that we will live that longer? That long? And the answer is yes, and I'm seeing it right now.
Yeah. No, you're exactly correct. And you just use that simple example of what that 2% compounding inflation, the impact it would have for somebody over that's living 40 more years. And you're exactly right. Living to 105 now, it's fairly common. It's just going to get more common too. So it provides challenges for financial advisors, but it's not also you've done a lot of research on this, Sal. It's not just about living longer, but it's about living longer and living healthier, right? Like when you're 105 before, it might be wearing Depends and all this stuff in a nursing home. That's different now.
Yeah, and so and you bring up a great point, Ryan, because it's health span, not lifespan. See, that's the difference that we are going to be facing. It is highly conceivable that your advisors on this call, they'll be 115 years old, still playing golf, still playing pickleball, still as active as can be, riding their bicycles to the lake. I mean, whatever it is that they're doing now that they will continue to do. One of the interesting things that I saw was there is a shot that was approved for dogs.
Okay.
And basically, for a dog that's 40 pounds or less, you can give that dog a shot that will increase their health span. It's not about living longer, where the dog is basically in poor health. It's about them living longer in good health. And if we have that for dogs, how long will it be before we have it for humans? And just so you know, Ryan, I am having dog biscuits every night. So if they don't get to the humans, maybe I could take the shot myself. But do you see how the advancements in science can change this? Now add in AI, not AI as we have it today. Think in terms of the evolution of AI going forward to 5 years, right? Where it's going to be that much more powerful, right? And it's not necessarily that AI is going to figure out all the cures for everything that we have. But if I'm a doctor doing research and I'm really close, but I'm not quite there yet, right? I feed whatever I'm doing into the AI, right? Where basically the AI tells me, well, why don't you try this instead, right? So, and even today, Ryan, I know people that have ailments where they would have passed away had it been even 15 years ago, where they're not only alive and doing well, but they're flourishing right now because of the advancements that we have in science. And don't get me started on DNA, research that's being done right now that literally can transform people with dementia, other type of ailments.
Yeah, maybe I should start thinking about that. It's amazing the things I forget about some of those advancements. And Sal, you bring up some really good points. And what else is interesting? You brought up riding bike to the lake. That's what we did this weekend. Is we took our bikes. So it's amazing when I go for a bike ride how many older people, older generations are riding bikes. And a lot of it too, we talk about technology is e-bikes, right? E-bikes, these advancements are getting people out being active that maybe 20 years ago they wouldn't have done to help create, enhance their health.
Right. And but that's where your financial advisors that are listening to this podcast, that's where you can start adding a difference in terms of your marketplace. As you're speaking to retirees, right? Are the financial advisors that the prospect may be with, are they still looking at retirement planning from this Monte Carlo? You're going to live for 20 years, 25 years, 30 years, right? And then we have a good shot of having enough money, right? Because if we utilize the old-fashioned way of investing, what I believe it's going to create is what I call a multi-generation retirement. And I have a friend of mine that's going through that right now. He's 70 years old. He has his mother-in-law who's 104 years old, doing well. She's not playing pickleball every day, but she is sharp. She's walking. She is active, but she has run out of money and has run out of money for a while. He wants to retire, but in his planning, he never planned on funding two retirements at the same time, and it's kept him working well beyond the years that he wanted to work. Right. Think about this just for a second. Right. A couple has a child at age 30. That child is 70 years old. Mom and dad are 100 years old, right? In a world where we have genetics, we have advancements in science, we have all of these things that can keep us going much longer. Being at 100 years old, they're really not old, right? Again, don't think of, but you nailed it, Ryan. Don't think of 100 years old as wearing the pens and being basically stuck in a corner just watching a wall all day. They'll be active. But now mom and dad had planning that really didn't take into account them living longer, right? So now they're broke, right? So now that child is taking care of two generations of retirees, right? That child also had a kid at age 30, right? That child is now age 70, right? Which means their parents are 100, their grandparents are 130. Again, if neither of those generations have, a more advanced look at retirement, that could mean that that child is now supporting three generations
Yeah.
in retirement, right? Now, and the thing is, there's one thing that that child does not have that everybody else had. It's inheritance. You see, inheritance has been a wonderful thing that has helped, generation after generation. Mom and dad pass away, got 50,000, 100,000, whatever it was, it helped. But if mom and dad are broke and grandparents are broke, that means there is no inheritance, and they're supporting those generations.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So great insight, different way to think about it. Because I've had some guests on recently that talk about the multi generational issue, not issues, but how it gets more complicated when that middle parent in that hierarchy is taking care of their parents and then also taking care of their kids who might be in college. A lot of people I talk to is, guy, I can't wait for my kid to be done with school, then I can get a pay raise for themselves. But now it just makes it so much more complex, and really it falls on the financial advisor to help them.
Because what you're talking about there is the sandwich generation. But I'm still working, right? So, in other
Yeah.
words, if I needed to get a second job, then I get a second job because I have to support mom and dad and also my kids. I could adjust to it. But here, I want to retire. I want my income to stop purposely so I could enjoy life, right? And that's where when your financial advisors start talking to clients about retirement, to be able to sound a little bit different, perhaps just saying we need to be looking at portfolios that maybe stress growth a little bit more, right? That aren't as conservative, right? Those are the type of things that maybe separate them from everyone else. So
Yeah. You brought up sequence risk. I'm assuming too, like you're living to 130, 140, sequence risk even becomes a bigger factor.
Yeah. So, but look at it from a different perspective. Again, your advisors have to start talking to clients differently to distinguish themselves from everyone else. Sequence risk, we typically look at sequence of return risk. But how about sequence of inflation risk? I'm retiring today. I'm at 2.7% inflation. It's get a little bit more difficult, right? I now have higher inflation, or let's assume I retired in 2021 as inflation started creeping up and would wind up hitting that peak at over 9%. I'm still sitting at 2.7, may go higher, right? So all of a sudden now my retirement planning based on that sequence of risk, right? That could devastate me just as much as sequence risk of return might. So think about this just for a second. I am 65 years old, $1 million. My wife and I, we decide we're going to retire, right? If we take the FDA average for food over the last 50 years, if we take the FDA average amount that people spend for food, average, not the person spending a lot, not the
Yep.
person, spending very little, just average. Do you realize that my wife and I will be eating approximately $2.7 million on food alone because of the compounding effect of that inflation? That's just food. Ryan,
Yeah.
what happens with all the other expenses that they would need to take a look at? Do you see how the dialogue has just needs to change?
Yeah, you're exactly right. And that really, you say, start talking about millions of dollars in terms of expense just to eat. it really opens up your eye, catches your attention. It's like, wow, I need to rethink some of this, especially with your portfolios. And you mentioned it earlier about your investment portfolios need to be more growth, right? Instead of at age 60 starting to have 40% in bonds, you might still need to have more of a aggressive growth portfolio. Is that true? What type of strategies should financial advisors think about when it comes to investment portfolios?
I think it is so it's a term that I use, but with deep respect, right? So please, I am not being facetious, but it's kicking the bucket. That's what you have to do. You have to kick the bucket,
Okay.
right? We have been using bucket theories, right? Bucket strategies for years and years in our industry, and they have worked.
Yeah.
They have been a wonderful way of working with retirees. But we have to start asking ourselves as financial advisors, if I have a strategy that says, let's say, 36 months of income in a money market account, right? Where, where the return is just tiny compared to other investments, could be getting worse if interest
Yep.
rates do come down. And then I have other buckets that are also more conservative as I go on, and then I have my one bucket later on, right? But those are all geared towards a retirement, typically a retirement of 30 years, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what we need to be looking at is perhaps a little bit more aggressive way of working it. One of the things we have at Dunham is an overlay strategy, and what it does, it will reduce the amount of equities at the top of the market, and it's math, right? There's no
Yeah.
AI. There is no 42 factors that we're putting into a blender, to figure out, when the 200-day average, moving average does this might happen. All we're saying is as the market moves up or down by percentages, and there's a time factor in the algorithm as well, where we're selling, right, when the market's going higher, and then we are buying as the market's going lower. It's inspired by Warren Buffett, the adage that be greedy when others are fearful and be fearful when others are greedy.
My favorite.
That's what we're doing, right? So if you think about what that means is if you put that in a portfolio, right, doesn't that automatically de-risk, right, in buckets, right? What you do is if you have a really, really strong market, you start thinking of de-risking portfolios. You take the right end of the buckets and you start moving it into more conservative buckets. If markets are down, then you up risk. In other words, now you start trying to decide, okay, what do I take out of the more conservative portfolios to put in my longer term buckets? Well, this would do it automatically. And it's really incumbent on our industry to really help our financial advisors find things that can be utilized like that, so that as a financial advisor, I'm not trying to make these type of decisions in terms of when to de-risk, when to up-risk, where it can happen more automatically. So I'm more focused on
Okay.
on the client.
Interesting, because we talk about being active, right? And it goes back to just as you get older, you get more conservative, but it's your strategy that you just talked about at Dunham. It's being more proactive and not just buy and hold, but also take advantage of market cycles, risk, take advantage of that and use it to your advantage.
Yeah, you said it correctly. So it's taking advantage of market cycles. What we're doing, we're not market timing, right? Market timing doesn't work. I shouldn't say period. I have not had great experience with people that are market timers, right? When they guess correctly, it looks great. But then when they don't guess correctly, right, the portfolios simply don't do well. What this is simply doing is it's not reacting to the fact that there may be higher tariffs or lower tariffs. It's just saying, what's the effect on the market because of tariffs?
Yeah.
So if the effect is what we had in March and early April, right, this strategy was buying as people were leaving. In fact, if you remember that Thursday and Friday where the market was down, I think it was 9.8%, and the next day it was down
Yeah.
almost 9% again. We bought both days, right, in a row because If the market's panicking, right, that's when we're greedy, when the market is fearful. When the market started going back up again, we're happy now to sell back at what are higher prices
Yep.
for those same equities we just bought that were a bit lower.
Yeah,
But again,
fantastic.
these are the strategies. The conversation that your financial advisors have to have with their clients is just it has to start being a little bit different, and maybe a little bit more concentrated on keeping a heavier emphasis on growth.
Real quick, Sal. So for years, another way it's evolved, and I've done some research on Zephyr on this, the 4% rule, right? That
Right.
4%, you know, retirees, they can safely take out 4% per year and they should be okay. I did some research on that when interest rates were at 1%. Does it still hold water? It did for the most part. Do we need to rethink that too?
Yeah, and what you saw this weekend is the father of the 4% rule is now saying 4.5 to 5.5% might be a more appropriate number. And part of it is you have to be careful, right? I have seen clients saying, when I die, I want my estate to be worth a dollar,
Yeah.
right? I want to spend and enjoy all my retirement. You have other retirees, and I've seen retirees with 10, 11, 12 million dollars petrified that they're going to run out of money, right? And they don't spend, they don't do things that they should be doing while they're younger. So I think the concept of the 4% rule in terms of a guideline makes sense. But where your financial advisors can really add value, and this is where they can differentiate themselves from everyone else, rather than just talking about a 4% rule, what if they talk to the client in terms of being their CFO? In other words, if I were a CFO of a major corporation, I take a look at what we earned. I take a look at projections going forward,
Yeah.
what we believe that will go on. And from there, that's where we develop a budget for the business for the year. We don't just willy-nilly say, all right, 4%, let's spend 4% again this year. A financial advisor, whether you're using eMoney, Dunham has a program to do this, right? You can find them all over. It doesn't matter, but you need to be that client CFO. You need to evaluate where the market has been. You need to evaluate what they're spending, and please don't have them hold on to their money too tightly. Make sure they're also enjoying everything that they worked up to that led them to that retirement.
Yeah. Sal, fantastic insight. Really good stuff. Lastly, last topic. So when you think about longevity, living to 140, does that maybe bring back, and I'm not saying the emphasis or the benefits of annuities went away, but do you think that would be a strategy that maybe is maybe front and center that maybe more people should consider? Is annuities, since you've got that longer lifetime and get more money, more income from the providers?
So if there is some type of cost of living adjustment to it, the answer is it is a wonderful way of having something that can create a degree of certainty within the portfolio. Without it, if I told you, Ryan, hey, this is great. Yeah, you're going to have $10,000 a month from this annuity. What is that $10,000 worth 40 years later, 50 years later, at 2% inflation, right? It's going to eat at it to the point where it's just not enough. It's great. There's still income. There's still things that you'll be able to afford. You're not completely broke, right? But certainly the amount that's coming off of that $10,000, is that really enough to sustain yourself? Right? And that will be the risk that the annuity holder may face in this scenario where we're living a lot longer.
And like you said earlier, you how much are you eating? Literally consuming of that $2 million is your cost of eating. Does that $10,000 annuity payment cover much of that? Yeah,
Correct.
20.
Correct. And if you eat like I do, right, it'll be like 6 million that I'll need to spend for
Yes.
retirement.
Yes, I enjoy a good steak. A good steak. Sal, what a fun conversation, just like our previous one. You dropped such great insight and a very important topic, but you shed some light in a little different way to make us think. Very important. Thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been a
It's a
pleasure to have you
pleasure.
on. Where can our audience get more information about Dunham and Associates?
So feel free to give our business development desk a call. The number is 858-964-0500. 858-964-0500.
Fantastic, Sal. Thank you so much. And thank you, everyone, for listening to this episode of Zephyr's Adjusted for Risk podcast. You can watch all of our other podcasts on the Adjusted for Risk YouTube channel, as well as on Spotify. And please be sure to like and subscribe our LinkedIn page. Thank you and have a great rest of your week.
All right. Thank you, Ryan.